So I wanted to start off, we've been talking about hectares and a hectare and an acre. So there's your soccer field, which a lot of you are familiar with. And so there's the hectare. The lower screen shows the hectare, and the upper is an acre. So a hectare is quite a bit bigger than 1 acre. And then we have a number of handy conversions to kind of be mindful of with real estate. So 1 square mile, 640 acres. 1 acre of land has 43,560 square feet. So sometimes we quote things in terms of square feet, like a house usually. And I think a normal size house here in Ottawa or median size house might have 2,000 square feet. And so it's kind of helpful if we have a 7,000 square foot lot that we have a 2,000 square foot house on. So large lots tend to be greater than 10,000, 10 to 12,000. And then of course you can get into small acreages and other things. So that's kind of helpful. Another side thing here is sections and townships. So if you look at the legal descriptions throughout the United States, the book doesn't get into this too much, but we have a lot of crazy descriptions. And so it does talk about where that all came from. And so there are 36 sections in each township. So if you look at a map of Kansas, for instance, you've got the town square, the town center is here, and then it's a series of squares and rectangles. And let's see, I had this set up earlier, but let me go ahead and do this because I think it'd be kind of fun to look at the picture just on the internet here. Let's see, I got to get rid of some of my scribbles now. If you Google, I think I did it the other day, sections and townships. There's some nice pictures here under the images. And so this one here let me show you a map of a state. At least I thought I saw one the other day. It's just kind of nice to see the whole state. So here is, what is this? Is that Iowa or Kansas? I can't tell, but so these are all the counties. And so you can see the little square grids in there are representing the townships. And so when we get into legal descriptions, you can then say stuff like the northwest quarter of the northwest quarter, and that is how legal descriptions work. So I just wanted to just give you a little introduction that this system is in place, and this is how we describe real estate, which is important in a spatial economics class, that we at least have an idea of what's going on there. So back to our picture. This is our townships. Okay, so good enough. Well, let me see. I just wanted to say 1 square mile is a section. So everything is very geometric and fairly easy once you understand the system. So we have urban growth controls is the title of this section. And the government has a role in saying what you can do within a municipality. They have powers that are pushed down to the states. And so some places can be more regulated than others. And so we're going to look at the growth of the city and who chooses and how does it get done, and where do property tax dollars and other things fit in. And we'll see that a lot of people have various vested interests. And so as usual in that economics, the incentives matter. And so we'll see how that plays out in this. So zoning really began around 1916. We had lots of things changing. Of course, transportation was probably the biggest thing. We go from horse to car and bus and train, and we mentioned some of that in previous chapters. And so zoning evolved because we might want certain types of uses near each other. We might want some other types of uses not so near to each other. So you might not want to build your house right next to an industrial plant. And so that's part of what zoning is used for. So there's other kind of public goods or quasi-public goods, such as pollution of what your neighbors are doing. We have the approach of trying to internalize the externality. You might remember from previous classes that is there a way we can avoid doing taxes by imposing the cost on the polluter directly. So that's called internalizing the externality. We've got issues of noise, shadows. So if you, if you build a big tall building, there's been court cases where this little guy over here says, hey, you can't build this high rise because I'm in the shadow for 6 hours out of the day when I used to be able to enjoy sunlight. And it's like, oh, does that person have a claim or not, a rightful claim on property rights? Having a strong rule of law in regard to these issues is important. And so if you say no buildings higher than 4 stories, that might sound good because we want to keep our quaint little town the same. California kind of comes to mind where there's been lots of building restrictions. But then what's the cost of that? And we know that housing prices in parts of California like San Francisco and other places is extremely high. And that's one of the prices paid for the type of regulations that they had. So that is all the kind of material that we're going to be looking at. So here is the city map for zoning map for Ottawa. So here's Ottawa, Kansas, and this little thing over here shows the different types of uses. And then it's color coded. So we got green, ag, R1, R2 is different densities of residential. So a duplex, the 2 usually is like R2 is 2 dwellings can be together. Higher densities of apartments would be in R3 districts. And so that can vary throughout. We got places for mobile homes, offices. So really different types of businesses. You can't just go and do something in the town in general without knowing what the zoning laws are. And again, I want to go to a little more detailed map. So this is that same map, but it's got all the details that I can zoom in on it. So if we look here at Ottawa University, if I can find it, sometimes when I zoom too fast here, oh goodness, where is it here? All right, there we go. So again, on our legend here, public use, and then there's like school areas and stuff. So here we go. There's 15th Street. And there's Hickory, there's Cedar. So South Cedar, there's 11th Street. So this blue area is Ottawa University. And so surrounding Ottawa University, we have these residential areas at this point, but there are some yellow areas. And so if you remember back from our key, the yellow was R2, medium density. And so near the university, the city has zoned some areas to be able to put in higher density living. And so if you buy a house in this area, you might have duplexes being put up next to a single family home at some point in the future. It might not be happening now, but it could be there. And so my house is right here. This is I'll just put this thing right in the center. So my house, I guess let me do the drawing. There's my lot right there. And so if I chose to, I could possibly modify my house or bulldoze it down. I don't want to do that, but also when I purchased the house, because I was a real estate guy, I looked at this to know that if something happens in the future, there could be higher density residential. It might not just be a single family home that ends up opening or building next to me if there's some sort of changes. So with that, we'll kind of click back here to the PowerPoint. Okay, so when we do zoning, people should be thinking about the fiscal impact. So what do we mean by fiscal? Fiscal impact is government taxes. So if we think about the government budget, you've got government savings. If we think about macro class, equals tax revenue T minus government spending. So that's the government budget. So most places at the local levels have to have a balanced budget actually. And they pay for their spending, so local police, roads, fire, all the school systems. The type of taxes that are used typically are property taxes. And so there can be money that comes in from the state from various means, but that is how we're going to generate most of our tax revenue for the city is through property tax. And so that means we need to be sensitive anyway to how much tax new development's going to do. So a fiscal deficit would be a tax contribution less than the cost of the public services. So if you have a large household in a small dwelling, you're more likely to generate a deficit. What do we mean by a large household? We mean you've got a family of 7, and maybe you've got 5 cars as the kids get into high school, which means you're going to be using the roads, you're going to be using the police, you're going to be using the other public infrastructure more intensively than a household that only has 3 people in it. And so that's one consideration. And so usually large households are going to have large dwellings. And so that's part of how we're going to have our tax policy set. And so one of the things that cities do for various reasons, and this has changed, some of you have heard about the tiny houses. Well, most new subdivisions have restrictions on the size of house that you can put on there and sometimes the minimum lot size. So up in Iowa where I did real estate development, the minimum lot size was 7,000 square feet, which isn't a really big yard, but that was the minimum size that it had to be for the city. And part of what the city is doing for that calculation is they're looking at how many tax dollars. So this little formula here is just kind of helpful in looking at how a city planner could try to get the right amount of revenue in for the property. So if they set V prime as the target property value, and they know that land is selling for a certain price per acre, then using this little rule of thumb where the overall value is 5 times the land value, if we take 1/5 of the value we're trying to target. So for example, if we're trying to target, we want a $200,000 house and land combination, then approximately 1/5 of it is going to be the land value. And doing a little math here, working our way backwards, that can give you the optimal lot size that you need. So with the way I did this quick little calculation, it was 1/2 an acre for the minimum lot size. And here is just another quick look at that formula. And the book did make an error that I found after looking a little closer, so you might take note of that. Their presentation I didn't think was real clear. So this here should be 200,000, and then their math works out. So if you guys take out your calculator, I'm saying you to do it. Go ahead and prove it to yourself. Pull out the calculator. Again, the city is trying to get to a $200,000 value, which means a $40,000 lot. So 40,000 divided by the 240 gives you a lot size of 1/6 of an acre. And so if you remember, there is 43,560 square feet in a single acre. So that divided by 6 would give you the lot size in square feet that they need to do. I'll let you guys do that on your own. All right, so the boundaries, we saw the limits that we had and where the city can grow. Let me pull that back up here really quick just to kind of show that. I kind of blew this out a little faster, and I kind of forgot to mention what's called the urban growth areas. So these outer perimeters here of the city that's outlined in red, some of that's incorporated. So cities can have like long-term growth areas. So the actual city limits might be inside of this growth area as they're planning. And so where do we want Ottawa to grow if we have the luxury of growing? In Ottawa's case, we just want growth no matter what, but the city has identified some areas here south of town that you might be familiar with. The freeway cuts through somewhere in here. I think that's the white line. Yeah, that's I-35 cutting through here. And so here's I-35. And so south of Ottawa, they've identified some industrial growth. And so that's what they've got planned. And part of my tax dollars are actually funding towards some preliminary infrastructure that was done for that growth area. And so hopefully we'll land a big client or something that wants to put up a new thing. In the past, there was a story that Ottawa had missed out on a dog food manufacturing plant. Well, actually, Gibson did that originally up in North Ames. That's where our library, the Gibson Center, was named after Marguerite Gibson, whose husband and her started a dog food company here in Ottawa that was very successful, and they ultimately sold out to one of the big players and got pretty wealthy off of that. And so we've had other manufacturing plants that we've missed out on in the past. So hopefully we're more prepared for that now. All right. So if we have growth, we can use our previous model that we had with redistribution. And so if we have cities changing, remember when we use this, so we've got an initial equilibrium here with hypothetically 2 cities at 4 million. And if we have a growth control policy that somehow is restrictive, you know, where are those people going to go? They're going to run to another city. And so that city's going to grow, and the other one is going to shrink. So let me go get my dog really quick. I don't think anybody's out there. Maggie, oh, you are out here, good, okay. Okay, false alarm, my dog, or my wife is out on the patio, so I think we're safe. Okay. So that was the, you know, people are going to reallocate. Remember, we had this stuff here that the bigger city starts to have some of those negative effects outweighing it, and so congestion starts to occur. So at the end of the day, though, we're going to have 2 cities, a smaller city and a bigger city, but equal level of utilities as people vote with their feet and move to a different town. Okay. So winners and losers from growth boundaries. You know, who's benefiting and who is hurting. So kind of standard stuff that we see within industries trying to get protection. They're trying to basically be anti-competitive. And so existing landowners, people who already own land within the city, will generally see their values go up. And so that's usually the winner. The loser, of course, would be people with lower levels of utility, possibly higher housing prices. And so those are some of the exchanges that are going to happen, trade-offs that exist when we get into some of these zoning issues. All right, so here is our bid rent function that we've worked on in previous chapters. So again, we have ag bid rent, and it is fixed. So we have a straight line. Basically, the ag people don't really care where they're at, right? So they have a value of land that, depending on how productive the soil is and all the other issues, they're willing to pay a certain amount for ag land, but they can locate further away from the city. It's not that big of a deal to to be in close. And so that was our bid rent function, where we start to get into, you know, where we had businesses and households and maybe manufacturing and other people entering into the picture. And so we'll use that model to kind of think about some things here. So the first thing to think about is an urban growth boundary. So imagine that we're going to say, well, we don't want to grow more than this for whatever reasons. We don't like new people or something. And so what happens when we restrict that boundary? The city might otherwise normally grow out to 12 miles from the center. So again, we're looking here, remember we're measuring distance from the center. And so as we kind of choke off the city and say, we don't want to grow further than that, what's going to happen? Well, think about the bidders. Is there more bidders or less bidders for a smaller amount of land? And there's going to be more. And so the bid rents are going to go up right at the boundary. We're going to have this discontinuous jump. So the new function looks like this. It comes down and then all of a sudden, whoop, it drops down to here, right? So that is the new bid rent function. By law, it's flat right there. It's flat and equal to ag uses. And so that would be what's going on if we try to restrict growth. So density is a different issue. So what happens when cities allow density? So even in Iowa, where I was at, there was an effort to try to increase density near the university. So it's kind of what you saw on the map of Ottawa. Ottawa's kind of lean and mean, right? And so Ottawa University's here. Notice that the planning was like, well, maybe someday these will be duplexes or some sort of multifamily because of the university there. And so the idea of density is you're having more bodies per square foot, more people utilizing the land. And so that's the issue that we'll explore. And what happens within is, again, using our utility model, we end up getting this redistribution of people across the cities. And again, starting off with 4 people, we have a population. If the control city does not limit size, so the control city does not limit size, the increase in the price of land resulting from a growth boundary will increase density, generating a population of 3.5 million, so point F. Regional equilibrium is going to be restored at points F and G, so F and G, with the common utility level of 67. And so we have a total of 8 million people, and we have changes in population according to the density changes. And notice that overall we had average utility levels of 72, but that has gone down due to these restrictions being put into place. Okay, so building permits. So some places put like a moratorium on building when there's a big issue coming up or they're not sure, there needs to be public debate about something. So a moratorium is to say no building. Okay, we're not going to build here. But in general, how things are regulated is through the issuing of building permits. And so they might just say, okay, we're only going to allow 100 new homes being built, right? So they're trying to, again, restrict the growth through the allocation of permits. In this case, what we're not doing is saying, you got to build it here, you got to build it here. So we're past the zoning aspect that we were studying earlier. And now it's more about them issuing the number of permits. It's like, you can, as long as you've got 10 permits, you can go build 10 houses. We don't care where you put it as long as it's on the land that we said you could do new construction on with that type of building. If it's a single family home, then you can do that in any of those areas. So if we have effective controls with building permits, that's limiting what the free market supply would be, the expected effect is what we see here in this picture of what a quota does. And so a quota restricts the number of new houses. So in a free market, if the supply and demand would have been at 120 units at a $200,000 price tag, now with our restricted building permits at 80, it effectively makes the supply curve kinked. So the supply curve comes down and now it goes up. So now supply with the limited permits is now at 250. So these types of actions, again, are going to be putting upward pressure on prices. So you can think about the finances here with the permit kind of using the leftover principle. So if we have building permits and we do we can sell the house for $250,000 with $160,000 worth of cost, which is what that last picture was showing. We've got $90,000 of this additional profit left over for the builders that were lucky enough to get the permits. Remember, there wasn't as many houses being built, only 80 of them. So that causes the possibility for the permit prices to eat up some of that. It also might add to brick and white picket fences and flowers and holding ponds and parks, or whatever, other things that tend to increase the cost to the builder that they might not have otherwise done. So some subdivisions might have all brick requirement or something. And that's fine. If a private developer bought the land, they bought a large chunk of land and they say, hey, I want a housing development to look like this. Big houses, brick, 3-car garages. That's totally fine. That's all free market. No problem there. But in other cases, if it's the city who's requiring the brick, which can happen, that's not the private sector bringing that solution. That's some government official, government bureaucrat, or an elected official that's trying to make the city prettier. Maybe there's people out there that are happy with a third of brick instead of full brick house, for instance, or something like that. We don't know that when we have these one-size-fits-all policies coming down from the bureaucrats. We don't know who's going to do it. So this idea here of the building beauty contest. So if we're effectively rationing out building permits, then maybe it's the builder that makes their houses the prettiest, right? And again, prettiness means housing costs are going to go up. So we have this escalation of prices from these types of policies. All right, so economists have studied what types of things this might do. And so some people at Wharton, these folks down here in 2008, studied a number of different factors that can go on with building. So the length of building time, high impact fees, so extra fees basically depending on the type of development you're doing. Permits require review by several officials, which means there's meetings and time commitment and changes needed to plans. We've already mentioned kind of the quota on permits. Minimum lot size is relatively large. So if you have a larger lot size, you usually need a higher valued house to offset that. And builders are required to provide open space like parks or green space. So the city could kind of dictate that. So some cities have a lot of those regulations. And what these folks did is looked at what is the premium that they're paying on the houses that they have. So San Francisco, very heavily regulated, they estimated a $250,000 premium because of the regulations. So they are a heavily regulated city. So the index, taking all of these things into account, they just kind of came up with a metric like we've prepared other indices. And 1.96 was theirs. Meanwhile, Atlanta, a little bit lower, but then you've got places like Dallas that are very low. So 0 is the kind of average level of regulations. It's certainly not no regulation, of course. So these regulations can be very good, but whether they become onersome or not, that's the issue. And so these cities, Seattle, 305,000. The economists went in and looked to see, well, what's the impact of these? Is it true that cities who have more regulations have higher prices? And this is the data that they found. So kind of some interesting results that support some of the theories that we're putting forth. So here's, again, theory shows a supply curve that's kinked up, that's going to increase. So supply with housing regulations versus unregulated supply. Where does that supply? Remember, the supply curve is the marginal cost curve. So if we have the beauty contest, the brick, the open spaces, or other things, meetings that may otherwise not be that necessary, all of those regulations are raising the cost. And that's what that Wharton index is reflecting. All right, so that wraps up this chapter. So we had zoning plans and development limits, permits, different laws of the localities. So that wraps up our chapter 16. And so give that chapter a read, and we'll get into some problems to reflect that as well. So let's see, let me get back to my stop the share. We're all set. Bye.